Hunting has always been a controversial topic. Some see it as necessary for food, population control, or managing invasive species. Others think of it as a sport for trophy hunters. But for Dave Warner and his friend Nick Ciarlante, it had never been about trophies. That is, until the night they crossed paths with the biggest wild hog they'd ever seen. Dave and Nick weren't born into the hunting life. They had spent most of their lives as city guys, only taking up hunting in the last 10 years. They started with guided trips, learning the ropes from seasoned experts. It was an expensive way to begin, but it helped them build skills quickly. Wild hogs became one of their favorite targets, especially after their first trip to Lake Eufaula, where they bagged their first hog. A year later, they decided to hunt near Macon, Georgia. Their guide, a 25-year-old named Brandon, had promised them a proper hunt, one that wouldn't involve sitting in a stand, waiting for an easy shot, tracking wild hogs the old-fashioned way. At 3:30 a.m., after a long, uneventful day, Brandon asked if they were ready to pack it in or if they wanted to keep going. "Let's hunt," Dave said without hesitation. Brandon grinned. He loved hunters willing to put in the extra effort. They grabbed their rifles and headed into the thick, dark woods of Twiggs County. Hog hunting on foot is no joke. There are no tree stands to keep you safe, no barriers between you and the wild. Just you, your gun, and the unknown. Every broken twig sounded like a potential threat. Every rustling leaf made their hearts pound. For hours, they moved slowly, stopping to listen every few yards. They covered swamps, pine forests, millet fields, and dirt roads. The night was eerily quiet, until it wasn't. Around 3:30 a.m., as exhaustion was setting in, Brandon stopped suddenly. "There they are," he whispered. "Hear 'em?" They froze, listening. A deep chorus of grunts and squeals echoed through the night. It was a large pack of hogs, dozens of them. Dave steadied his Henry lever-action .30-30 rifle, heart pounding. The next few seconds would determine everything. The spotlight blazed to life, cutting through the darkness. "There they are," Brandon shouted. Hogs erupted in every direction, running full speed. He picked the biggest one, a massive brindle-colored beast sprinting across the field. He barely had a second to aim. Instinct took over. He lined up his shot just behind the ear and squeezed the trigger. Brandon turned to him. "Did you hit one?" Dave wasn't sure. It had all happened so fast. Slowly, they approached the field, rifles at the ready. If the hog was still alive, it could be dangerous. Wounded hogs have been known to charge and kill hunters who don't finish the job. Brandon's spotlight swept over the ground until it caught a massive heap of fur lying motionless in a low spot. Then it moved. "Shoot again," Brandon ordered. Dave fired a second shot, making sure the hog was down for good. As they walked closer, the reality of what had just happened sank in. It wasn't just a hog. It was the hog. The one hunters in the area had been trying to kill for years. Brandon let out a laugh. "Dude, you have no idea what you just shot." In the dim light, they could barely see the full size of the animal. But as they tried to move it, the reality hit them. It was enormous. Too big for the three of them to lift into the truck bed. Brandon made a call to some fellow hunters, letting them know the legend of the giant brindle hog had finally come to an end. "Some people are going to be bummed," he said with a grin. "This hog's been on trail cameras for years. No one ever got a shot at it." When they finally got it weighed, the number was shocking, 450 pounds. Before the night ended, Brandon asked, "So you mounting this thing?" Dave hadn't even thought about it. He wasn't a trophy hunter. But as he looked at the massive hog, he knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime hunt. Years later, Dave still looks at the mounted hog's head in his garage and remembers that night. The darkness, the rush of adrenaline, the perfect shot. It wasn't about trophies, but about the wild, unpredictable thrill of the hunt. And sometimes, when luck is on your side, you walk away with both. The swamp was silent. Too silent. Then a deep grunt. A shadow shifted. A legend stepped into the open. The rifle came up. Breath held. One shot, one chance. And in that instant, alone in the middle of 600 acres of river swamp, the reality of the wild set in. This wasn't just hunting. This was survival. Trey had dropped me off here, deep in the heart of Georgia wilderness. I had asked for it, but I didn't expect this. A storm was rolling in, rattling the trees, shaking the ground blind where I sat. The plan was simple: wait for the hogs to show up. But hours passed, and the night grew colder. The green light I had brought wasn't working. My flashlight was awkward to hold alongside my rifle, and my patience was wearing thin. Then, as if to mock me, the trail camera captured what I had been waiting for. Dozens of hogs moving right past my blind. But by then, I was already on my way back to camp. Classic hog behavior, wild and unpredictable. But this hunt wasn't over. The hunting grounds stretched across multiple counties, managed by Woods and Water Plantation, owned by Blaine Burley. With over 7,000 acres of land, the team could adjust on the fly, moving hunters to where the animals were. Blaine, a seasoned hunter and former Air Force captain, had turned these lands into a haven for deer, turkey, and wild hog hunting. "We can never fully get rid of them," Blaine said about the hogs, so we managed them instead. That meant using everything from scouting cameras to carefully placed bait stations. The strategy worked. Hog populations were kept in check, preventing them from destroying crops and native wildlife. The thick swamp surrounded me. As the evening deepened, I stayed still, listening. Patience. That's what separates a successful hunt from a wasted night. Then, movement. A lone hog appeared from the shadows, jet black and just over 100 pounds. Not the one I wanted. I held my fire. 5 minutes passed. Then the ground seemed to come alive. One after another, hogs poured into the clearing. 15, maybe more. I adjusted my rifle, a Model 70 Winchester, and steadied my breath. But before I could pick my shot, something caught my eye. A shape, bigger than the rest, lurking at the edge of the woods. My heart pounded. This was the one. The giant boar stepped into the open. It was massive, shoulders towering over the rest. A true trophy. I took aim, but just as I steadied my shot, the beast jerked its head up and let out a deep, guttural woof. Instinct took over. The silence of the swamp shattered as the 30 out of 6 roared through the trees. The bullet hit hard, knocking the boar off its feet, but it wasn't done. It thrashed, trying to stand. One more shot sealed the deal. The hog was legendary in these parts, a beast that had been spotted on game cameras but never taken down. We struggled to load it into the truck. It took all our strength to lift even half of it. Later, when we weighed it, the scale read 450 pounds. This one's going on the wall, and with that, a new hunting tale was born. One of patience, instinct, and the night a giant boar finally met its match. A hunting trip takes a deadly turn, with 2 aggressive grizzly bears, some choices that may have altered the outcome, and possibly just a cruel twist of fate. It's a tragic reminder that even with the right equipment, anything can go wrong in the wilderness. In this story, we recount the events surrounding Mark Uptain, a 37-year-old elk hunting guide, and the hunting trip that would tragically be his last. On September 13, 2018, Corey Chubon from Florida met up with his guide for the day, Mark Uptain. Uptain was set to assist Chubon in pursuing his dream of hunting elk. While Florida is home to many diverse species, wild elk are not among them. So, like many other hunters, Chubon had planned a lengthy trip to hunt in a location known for its elk population. After much consideration, he decided on Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming, U.S., as the ideal spot for his bow hunting adventure. The Bridger Teton National Forest in western Wyoming covers around 3.4 million acres, making it one of the largest national forests in the U.S. The area is home to a variety of wildlife, including elk, moose, coyotes, cougars, bison, wolves, and grizzly bears. While these creatures can be intimidating, they add to the forest's appeal, making it a popular destination for tourists and locals alike. The Bridger Teton National Forest is highlighted for its 4 key features: wildlife, winter activities, wilderness, and wild and scenic rivers. These characteristics likely caught the attention of Florida native Corey Chubon in September 2018. He planned to hunt elk with a bow, but knew he needed a trusted guide to navigate the wilderness. This led him to Mark Uptain, a 37-year-old seasoned guide from Jackson, Wyoming. Chubon hired Uptain for his trip, and on Thursday, September 13, 2018, the pair set off into the Bridger Teton National Forest. Riding horses, they spent the day searching for elk. Eventually, they spotted a bull elk, giving Corey the chance to take a shot. Unfortunately, the shot didn't kill the animal, leaving it wounded and on the run. The 2 men were unaware of where it had gone, but they began searching for it anyway. As darkness started to fall and the 2 men had still not found the wounded elk, Chubon and Uptain decided to leave and continue their search the next day. On Friday, September 14, 2018, they met up again and immediately resumed the search for the elk that Chubon had shot the day before. With the help of a large blood trail, the search became much easier. Around 1 p.m. that afternoon, they finally found the bull elk. It was dead, and the carcass had not been disturbed by any predators. The 2 men tied up their horses nearby and set to work. Their plan was to field dress the elk so they could process it for transport on their horses. As the hours passed, the warm temperature made it uncomfortable for Mark Uptain. He decided to remove his shirt and chest holster. This seemingly small decision would have big consequences. The holster contained his 10mm Glock, a crucial piece of safety equipment. By taking it off and leaving it behind, Uptain essentially parted with a vital defense measure. Little did he know he was about to need it more than ever. The 2 men resumed their work, but suddenly, they heard something that made their blood run cold. It sounded like rocks being banged together, a noise that could only signal trouble. Before they could react, 2 grizzly bears charging toward them with terrifying speed. One of the bears was an adult female, while the other was a yearling, following closely behind its mother. The situation spiraled out of control as the adult female grizzly pounced, locking onto Uptain. With his guide under attack, Chubon was consumed by terror, but he knew he couldn't let his fear take over. He couldn't allow the bear to maul Uptain right in front of him. The only way to fight back was to retrieve the Glock that Uptain had discarded. Chubon sprinted to where the handgun lay, 5 to 10 yards away, but when he grabbed the semi-automatic pistol, Chubon struggled to get a clean shot. He finally managed to get a brief opening, but that's when he realized the gun wasn't working. The slide wouldn't move. The yearling bear stayed on the sidelines, seemingly uninterested in attacking, which gave Chubon a moment to think. He continued trying to operate the Glock, but he was unfamiliar with how it worked, and nothing was happening. The bear's attention quickly shifted. The sow left Uptain, now focusing entirely on Chubon. The massive beast charged him, and before he knew it, it clamped its powerful jaws around his right boot. The bear managed to partially throw Chubon off balance, but he wasn't completely knocked to the ground. Chubon quickly threw the handgun toward Uptain, who was still yelling at the bear in an attempt to distract it. However, the gun didn't quite make it to Uptain. It landed just short, leaving Chubon with no immediate way to fight back. Agitated by their frantic movements, the sow refocused on Uptain, intensifying the attack. Seeing an opportunity to escape, Chubon realized his only chance to survive was to run and get help. As he turned to flee, The last thing he saw of his guide, Mark Uptain, was the man standing firm, facing the bear, doing his best to hold his ground. That would be the last time anyone saw Uptain alive. With terror driving him, Chuban ran as fast as he could across the rough terrain, the sounds of the bear's pursuit echoing in his ears. After covering about 400 yards, he reached the horses. With haste, he untied the animals, managing to get one of them ready for flight. He spurred his horse into action, riding desperately toward the top of a ridge. It was his only hope of finding a signal for help. At approximately 16:30, Chuban's frantic 911 call reached Teton County Sheriff's Office dispatch, and the search for Uptain would soon begin. It took rescuers 2 hours to reach Corey Chuban via helicopter, and with each passing minute, the chances of Mark Uptain's survival grew slimmer. The team worked quickly, but as darkness descended, they were forced to stop their search, leaving Uptain behind. They planned to return the next day, but time was not on their side. On September 15, 2018, rescuers located Mark Uptain's lifeless body, approximately 50 yards uphill from where the attack took place. His injuries were consistent with an aggressive bear attack. His skull showed signs of severe trauma from bear bites. Nearby, a can of bear spray with its safety removed was found about 5 yards from his body. The evidence suggested both the sow and her cub were involved in the attack. Despite his efforts to escape, dragging himself uphill, he eventually collapsed, dropping the bear spray before rolling to the base of a tree where he succumbed to his wounds. Authorities analyzed the attack and decided to take action against the bears. Given the lack of the elk carcass at the site, it was determined that the bears had not been guarding their food. Additionally, the bears approached the men rather than the other way around, suggesting the attack was unprovoked. The bears were likely drawn to the elk carcass and attacked in an attempt to feed. Wyoming game and fish staff set non-lethal traps at the site. The yearling was caught and euthanized, while the sow was shot after charging law enforcement officers on the scene. Mark Uptain is survived by his wife and 5 children, ages 10 to 17. A 5-foot-tall woman faces off against a 10-foot bear, the largest one ever documented. With only an old, worn-out rifle in her hands, she understands that her shot must be flawless. If she misses, the consequences could be deadly. As she raises her rifle, the bear catches her scent, turning to face her. Bella Twin, standing at a modest 5 feet, was a woman of remarkable strength. A member of the Cree Nation, she was deeply familiar with surviving in the wild. As an expert hunter and trapper, she had honed her skills from an early age, just like many others in her community. Her legendary encounter in 1953 took place in the remote wilderness near Alberta, Canada. At 63 years old, Bella had a lifetime of hunting experience. She knew every animal she tracked and trapped inside and out. Her father had taught her the precise technique to kill a bear with a single shot, how and where to aim. She'd learned this vital skill when she was just 13, and it would prove essential when she encountered the largest grizzly bear ever recorded 50 years later. On May 10, 1953, Bella and her companion, Dave Auger, were walking through the countryside near Alberta. They were making their way along an oil exploration cut line south of Slave Lake, hunting small game. Both of them were carrying firearms, but Bella's rifle was a sight to behold. It appeared old and unreliable, a .22 caliber single-shot Cooey Ace 1 rifle. The rifle was in rough shape. Its receiver was corroded, and the barrel was covered in rust, held together with hockey tape. The wood was worn, dull, and cracked, with screws missing. Anyone who picked it up would likely assume it no longer worked. It looked like an antique, but Bella was intimately familiar with her rifle. Despite its worn appearance, she trusted it completely. For decades, it had provided sustenance for her and her family. She never ventured into the wild without it. But now, she faced a new challenge. Would it be enough to protect her from a grizzly bear? She was about to find out. The sky above was overcast and gray, and a strong breeze rustled the leaves and branches. As Bella and Dave walked through the woods, Bella suddenly heard a sound. A twig snapping, followed by rustling in the underbrush. Turning quickly, she spotted a grizzly bear just yards away. The bear hadn't heard them nor smelled them due to the wind, and they had been lucky. Bella hissed to Dave, signaling for him to hide, but the bear lifted its snout, sniffing the air. It had detected them. The bear paused its foraging and began searching the area. Slowly, it followed the same path they had been walking, its head gently swaying from side to side, and its massive paws leaving deep impressions in the soft ground. Bella, hiding with Dave behind some bushes, peered through the foliage. The bear was massive, the biggest she had ever seen. There was a chance it might turn around, look away, and leave. But Bella wasn't willing to take that risk. She knew if it noticed them now, she would have mere seconds to react. She realized that they stood no chance against such a giant. So, without hesitation, she raised her rifle. Reports suggest she had it loaded with a .22 long cartridge. She took a deep breath, just as her father had taught her when she was a child. She remembered his advice. The best place to aim when killing a bear was halfway between the ear and eye if the animal was standing sideways. If it was facing directly, the target should be up the nose or the roof of the open mouth. Any deviation from these points, and the shot could fail to kill the bear, possibly injuring it. An injured bear, Bella knew, could be far more dangerous. She understood the importance of her shot. Just then, the bear saw them. Startled, it stood upright on its hind legs, displaying its enormous size and power. Some accounts suggest the bear lunged at Dave, and Bella's timely shot saved him. Other reports say she shot the bear before it advanced. Regardless, she fired. In an instant, the bear collapsed to the ground, lifeless, just a few feet from them. One shot had taken down the mighty creature. Bella reloaded her rifle, stepped out from behind the bushes, and aimed at the bear once more. She fired into its skull. There was no reaction. It remained still. Bella reloaded and fired again, and again, 7 times in total, ensuring that the massive beast was truly dead, not just stunned. Bella knew well the dangers of leaving an injured animal behind. Bella's remarkable shot quickly became a sensation, spreading far and wide. She gained attention and was hailed as a local hero, admired for her bravery and skill. Before long, people were eager to see the enormous bear that had fallen to her. Some grizzly hunters, those who devoted their lives to tracking and hunting the biggest bears, spending extensive time in the wild, were understandably frustrated to hear about the small woman's successful shot. However, Bella didn't boast about her accomplishment. For her, it was not about pride, but necessity. Despite the bear's immense size and impressive presence, Bella remained practical. Rather than keeping the bear's skin and skull as trophies, she sold them. She sold the bear's hide and rifle to a museum, while a collector purchased the skull. The money she earned from these sales would provide for her family and go much further than keeping the bear's remains. Before parting with the skin, Bella posed for a photo in front of it. In the picture, she is seated side-on to the camera, the massive bear skin towering behind her. She subtly hides her gun, likely ashamed of its worn-out, taped-up appearance. Bear size is often measured by the skull, and Bella's bear had an impressive one. Its skull measured 16.5 inches long and nearly 10 inches wide, earning a total score of 26.5 inches. This made the bear the largest one ever recorded at the time. Bella held this record for just 1 year before a commercial fisherman in British Columbia killed an even larger grizzly in 1954. Although the exact weight of the bear Bella hunted is unknown, Some estimates suggest it weighed around 1,000 pounds and stood 10 feet tall when on its hind legs. How Bella and Dave managed to transport the giant bear back to their village remains a mystery. It's unfortunate that such a magnificent creature met its end at the hands of a human, but when confronted by one of the most feared predators on land, it's often better to prioritize safety. Bella's remarkable story lives on through her grandson, Larry Loy, who immortalized her in the book As Long as the Rivers Flow. Over time, he felt that her incredible tale was being forgotten, and he made it his mission to preserve her legacy. Larry wanted the world to remember her astounding feat. Bella was an extraordinary woman and an expert survivalist, and her skills have been passed down through generations of her family. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts and comments in the reactions, and be safe. 39-year-old Brian Melvin had been on a bear hunt for 3 years. He was an avid hunter who lived in New Jersey. His weapon of choice was a bow and arrow. It felt more natural than any gun, and some say there is more skill involved. Whilst he was on a late-season deer hunt back in 2021, he spotted an enormous black bear. He knew then and there that he had to harvest him, and soon after it became an obsession of his. New Jersey seemed to be a hotspot for large bears. Just 4 years earlier in 2020, hunter Jeff Malillo made headlines when he shot and killed a world record-breaking black bear. Jeff made the shot with his bow and was surprised when the bear weighed in at 700 pounds with a skull length of more than 23 inches. It was an incredible hunt, but surprisingly, the record wouldn't last long. Brian Melvin began baiting the area, but the bear never visited the same spot twice. It was as though he knew Brian was onto him, and he was clever not to make a mistake. Whenever Brian set up an area to lure the bear close, the bear would disappear, only to reappear in a completely different location. For Brian, this was all part of the game. It was part of the excitement. Tracking and hunting something so clever was different from taking down any deer before. Brian was in it for the long haul. What made things more challenging for the hunter was that the bear kept on moving from state land to private land. So Brian had to do a lot of door-to-door knocking to gain permission to hunt on the private land. A year into his quest, and the bear had gained a reputation in the area. Most people he asked permission from were only too pleased that he was in pursuit of the Bruin. It was destroying people's backyards, ruining outdoor furniture, ripping jacuzzi covers apart, and even chasing both people and dogs into their homes. People feared that one day the bear would cause a fatality. Brian set up cameras in 25 to 30 different spots. He worked strategically, covering bear country inch by inch, mile by mile. But just when he caught a glimpse of the bear on one of his cameras, it would vanish for 6 months. But by tracking the bear over the course of 3 seasons, Brian began to understand his movement patterns. They weren't random movements. The bear had its favorite feeding spots and favorite beds. It roamed mostly in a 5-mile radius. At first, Brian's bait was hit and miss with the bear. Sometimes he would take it, other times he wouldn't. Brian discovered that this particular bear was far more partial to sweets than to meat. Initially, Brian baited 10 different sites, but he got that down to just 6. By setting up the wildlife cameras, Brian found out that the bear mostly took the bait at around 4 a.m. With all the information Brian had gathered over the past 3 years, it was finally showtime, but a few more things stood in his way. Bear hunting in New Jersey is a very controversial topic. Many people are anti-hunters, and it was banned by the state governor back in 2018. But in 2022, following a sharp increase in human bear incidents and a rise in the black bear population, the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife's Fish and Game Council voted unanimously to reinstate black bear hunting. It didn't come without its strict laws, though. 1. Hunters cannot kill a black bear. 2. Weighing less than 75 pounds. 3. Accompanied by cubs. 4. Within 100 yards of a baited area. On top of that, Brian only had a few days in which to make his once-in-a-lifetime shot. The first segment of the hunting season ran from October 14th to October 19th, with just the first 3 days open, only to bow hunters, and the second 3 days also open to muzzle loaders. The second segment was open to shotguns and muzzle loaders, and ran for 6 days in early December. By now, Brian wasn't the only hunter on the lookout for the massive bear. He had significant competition and would be gutted if another hunter got there first after all his hard work over the past 3 years. As the hunting season approached, Brian knew he had done all the groundwork. He knew the area the bear would be in. He had baited one of the sites ready, and he had obtained his license in advance. So, on the morning of October 15th, Brian set himself up in his stand and waited. He had with him a Hoyt Vector Turbo compound bow. This model is known for its lightweight and compact design. The Vector Turbo features a sleek aerodynamic profile that enhances maneuverability in the field. It typically boasts high arrow speeds and comes with adjustable draw lengths and draw weights. Brian opted for 535 grain Victory Extortion arrows, which are relatively heavy. Heavier arrows can provide better penetration and energy transfer on impact, making them effective for hunting large game. And finally, Brian used Sever 2.0 broadheads. These are mechanical broadheads, meaning they expand upon impact. This feature helps create a larger wound channel, increasing the chances of a quick, humane kill. The bear wandered towards the bait as Brian had predicted. He had set his stand up 200 yards from the bait, in accordance with the law, and anticipated that the bear would walk back along the trail just 20 yards from where Brian was hiding. But the bear had other ideas. It did backtrack along the route Brian had expected, but a bit further away. It moved along around 45 yards from the stand. But Brian knew this was his best chance. He drew back his arrow and stared down the line. In that moment, the bear was slightly turned away from him. It would be a quartering away shot, with the animal's body angled so that its rear was facing the hunter at about a 45-degree angle. This is often a prime shot. It means that the arrow or bullet can penetrate the animal behind its last rib, often penetrating the heart and lungs. It is less likely to strike bone, offers a larger target area, and will exit by the opposite shoulder, and ensures a quick kill. Brian held his breath as he took aim, then he released the arrow, and it flew into the animal. The bear lurched and ran away into the trees. Brian immediately called his friend to help him track the bear. Together they followed the blood trail left by the injured animal. It was a dangerous situation to be, on the path of a massive, wounded black bear. The flecks of dark red blood led the two men up towards the top of a cliff. There they found the bear. It was lying in its bed, gravely wounded but still alive. Brian didn't hesitate. He quickly raised his bow one more time and fired it straight into the animal. The bear breathed its last breath and fell silent. The two men walked up to inspect it more closely. They were shocked at just how enormous it was. Brian knew that most hunters would take the specimen straight to the check station to record its size and weight officially, but it was hot, and Brian was concerned the meat would spoil. So, he gutted the bear then and there before hauling it back to the check station. It proved to be the right decision. At the station, there was so much attention surrounding the size of the animal that the weighing and processing took a lot longer than normal. On the scales, the bear weighed in at 770.5 pounds field-dressed weight, but officials believed that it would have weighed 900 pounds live. This was considerably bigger than the previous record using any weapon, which was 825 pounds. Of course, having secured such an enormous, record-breaking bear, news traveled far and wide. And the response to his kill wasn't all positive. Brian received death threats from people who were anti-hunting. Although he found these shocking, Brian said that he respected other people's views and wanted everyone to know that nothing on the bear went to waste. Owen Miller is a hunting specialist. His weapon of choice is more unique than others. He started off hunting with his rifle, then he turned to a compound bow, and then he found his ultimate challenge, using a recurve bow. There was something about a recurve bow that excited Owen. It made the hunt harder and more challenging. It was a more traditional way of hunting. It requires more skill, depending on who you ask, and means you have to get a lot closer to the animal for the perfect shot. The challenge of a recurve bow comes with its more primal setup. It doesn't have sights, and it also doesn't have a compound bow's pulley system. This system allows a bow hunter to pull the string back and hold it for a prolonged period of time before releasing the arrow. This means that you can ready the bow, aim at the target, and only then release the arrow. But for recurve bows, it's more simply a case of drawing and shooting in one single motion. There is no room for error. But Owen's fussiness over his specific weapon of choice doesn't end there. He is also picky about the arrows he uses. He doesn't like the modern ones that have 4 or more cutting blades. He doesn't think they look traditional. So instead, he opts for arrows with triangle-shaped broadheads with 2 cutting edges. Using this more traditional hunting weapon and technique, Owen had to practice a lot. In fact, it took him more than 2 years before he felt confident enough to use the recurve bow on a real hunt. Teaching himself exactly when to pull back the string and his positioning for the perfect shot was an art form. Owen was no stranger to hunting. He had made many kills before. He had taken down bears, elk, and mule and white-tailed deer. For these, he had used his rifle or compound bow. For Owen, it was always about the thrill of the hunt, not about the size of the animal or the big trophy hunts. He just wanted to be in the great outdoors, seeking adventure. But there was a beast in his favorite hunting ground in southern Wyoming. It was almost of mythical proportions. It was a cinnamon-colored male black bear, and it was huge. Owen and his brother had seen it on a number of hunting trips, but they had always failed to shoot it. Somehow, it always evaded capture. It was like a ghost amongst the trees, disappearing from the sights, slinking away into the bushes before either of them could secure a shot. They would just catch a glimpse of it before it vanished for the rest of the hunting season. In the fall of 2023, Owen's brother stood patiently in a stand waiting for the mysterious bear to make an appearance. When he saw a head emerging from the undergrowth, he pulled his trigger, but it wasn't the cinnamon-colored bear he had hoped for, and the brothers couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. They would have to wait until the spring hunting season for their next shot at the elusive beast. Towards the end of May, Owen had a wedding to attend near his favorite hunting ground. He decided to combine a hunting trip whilst he was in the area. He baited the ground near a hunting stand before attending the wedding. When he came back, all the bait had been taken. So, he resupplied it. Then, he waited in the stand with his trusty recurve bow. It wasn't long before he heard a rustle in the surrounding undergrowth. Something beige appeared below him. He knew it wasn't a bear right away, and so grabbed his camera instead of his bow. To his surprise, it was a mountain lion. Owen didn't know what it was going to do. He wasn't far off the ground, and if the mountain lion decided to attack, he could be in trouble. But it walked right underneath him without glancing up. Owen held his breath as he watched the big cat sniff the ground where the bait lay and then disappear off into the distance. It was an incredible encounter that had made the wait worth it. Owen would have been happy if his hunting trip had ended there, but he was in for yet another surprise, one he had been waiting many years for. Owen wasn't expecting to see any bears that day. He had disturbed the bait, resupplied it, and hadn't long been in the tree stand. He knew from experience that usually it took bears a good few days to return to a disturbed spot. But he decided to wait a little longer to see if anything showed up. Then, at around 7 p.m., he saw it. The cinnamon-colored black bear. It was an incredible specimen, and it was completely unaware of Owen's presence. It must have determined that there was no danger and come to investigate. Owen couldn't believe his eyes. He wished his brother there with him now to witness the spectacle. It was tempting to take the shot right away. He had waited so long for this moment, but it had to be right. He couldn't risk injuring the bear and letting it get away. Patience was key with recurve bow hunting. He knew with the recurve bow, the positioning had to be perfect straight away. And so, he waited a little longer. He silently picked up his bow, ready to make the shot. Then, the bear walked a little closer to the stand, lifted his head, and stared up at Owen. Their eyes met briefly, and Owen knew that this was his chance. In an instant, he drew the bow and let it go in one swift movement. The shot was as perfect as they come. The arrow struck the bear side on and pierced both lungs. It was a powerful and immediately fatal shot, and the bear was dead within seconds. Owen had done it. He had taken the cinnamon-colored black bear he had wanted for so long, and he had used his recurve bow. It could not have been a more perfect hunt. His patience had paid off, and the last 2 years of mastering the recurve bow was worth it. The sun had now set in the sky, and the forest was cloaked in darkness. Owen had to be quick to process the carcass, but the bear must have weighed around 400 pounds. It was a huge job for one person, and it was around 1:30 in the morning before he hauled the first load of meat to his truck. Under Wyoming hunting regulations, black bears are classified as a trophy game species, which means that hunters aren't required to keep the meat. But Owen didn't agree with that. If you are going to take the life of an animal, you should make the most of it. He loved bear meat and intended to use as much as possible. He rendered down the fat for cooking oil and to use as waterproofing for hiking boots. When Owen hauled the skin and skull of the bear back home, his friends couldn't believe just how massive the bear had been. They were sure that Owen had set some kind of record, but Owen has always been reluctant to chase records and make trophy shots. That's not why he hunts. But after a lot of persuasion from his friends, he considered getting the bear measured officially by a certified Boone and Crockett score. Even though he had already processed the bear and waited a long time before considering getting the bear scored, he hadn't lost his chance. Because the official scoring is done by measuring the bear's skull, and that can only be done once it's gone through the mandatory drying period. This meant that Owen could still have a record-winning bear on his hands. Although the size of the animal was not Owen's goal, he couldn't help but wonder exactly how big his bear was compared to others that had been harvested. So he unofficially measured the skull himself, and it came out at 21 1/16 inches, which would mean that it's the 8th largest black bear ever taken in the state of Wyoming. What's your opinion on hunting with a bow? Please share your comments below. 21-year-old Taylen Brooks and his 18-year-old brother Wyatt were as close as anyone could be. They did everything together and shared a love for the great outdoors. They were avid anglers and hunters, enjoying decoying ducks together and taking down deer during the season. Wyatt in particular was an exceptional hunter and even tagged Pope and young class blacktail bucks when he was just 13 years old. Taylen worked with his father painting houses and cutting firewood whilst Wyatt was enrolled in the local firefighter academy. But on Saturday, March 23, 2024, their lives would come crashing down when they made the fateful decision to go searching for shed antlers in the Kelsey Hills. It was a hobby the two of them engaged in each year, but this time was different. It was the first day of junior turkey season, and because they were not actively taking part in the hunt, the brothers decided it was best not to carry a firearm. It was a decision that would prove fatal. Popular for hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding, the Kelsey Hills, with their rolling landscape and panoramic views of the surrounding Sierra Nevada foothills, are home to deer, coyotes, and mountain lions. The brothers parked their car and began searching for antlers, but as they walked through the long grass that afternoon, they were being watched by something. A predator. It had picked up their scent and now stalked closer. It was hidden from view, its large paws placed carefully on the dry ground with each footstep. Its ears pricked and alert. his tan-colored skin camouflaged amongst the undergrowth. It was a mountain lion, a relatively small male weighing 90 pounds, crouched in the grass. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the air. Then it began walking towards Taylen and Wyatt. The boys continued to scour the ground for antlers. Wyatt carried a small backpack to collect the antlers in. They bent down to brush away some undergrowth, unaware that they were being stalked. Then, when they walked down a bank and onto a track, they saw something stepped onto the track ahead of them. It was the mountain lion. It stood still for a few moments, not breaking its stare with the brothers. Taylen and Wyatt froze. Then, following standard protocol for such an encounter, they began shouting and waving their arms up in the air. Together, they were clearly bigger than the big cat, but it was not deterred by the loud noise, nor the size of the brothers. To their horror, the mountain lion began walking towards them. Immediately, their hearts began racing in their chest. The adrenaline started pounding through their body as they realized that the mountain lion was coming for them. It was a healthy-looking adult male. It wasn't starving or desperate for an easy meal. For some reason, it was intent on taking down the boys. It trotted towards them, and Taylen and Wyatt knew what was coming. They knew it would pounce on them at any second. Wyatt threw his backpack at the animal in a bid to scare it away or distract it. But the mountain lion didn't flinch. It continued forwards and then leapt onto Wyatt. He let out a yell as he was knocked to the ground. It was like a horror movie. It was all happening so quickly. Every hunter's worst nightmare was coming true. Despite being a relatively small mountain lion, its weight was made up of mostly muscle. Its powerful front limbs, its forceful jaws and long canines. It was a hunting machine, and Wyatt was no match for the wild animal. But he fought back bravely, kicking and punching it as it stood over him, biting down on his face and neck. He could feel the ripping and tearing of his skin. The mountain lion swiped at Wyatt's helpless body, slicing across his chest and torso, ripping his clothing and digging deep into his skin. He could feel the full force of the predator, but he refused to give up. One bite on the jugular and he would be dead. 1 inch to either side, and it would be game over. But he had had more than just his fists and feet to protect him. He had his big brother. And when Taylen saw the mountain lion on top of Wyatt, he brought down his fists on the animal with all his power. He delivered blow after blow, but the big cat refused to let go of Wyatt. Only when Taylen jumped onto the back of the mountain lion did it loosen its grip on his little brother. Wyatt scrambled to his feet. But the mountain lion didn't back down. It may have released Wyatt, but its attention was now turned to Taylen. It leapt onto him, tackling him to the ground, and the two battled for life and death. Wyatt screamed at the animal and hit it repeatedly, but nothing he did would stop it from attacking his brother. The animal growled, a deep guttural sound as it mauled Taylen's face and throat. Wyatt knew time was running out for his brother. He had his mobile phone in his pocket, but there was no signal. The last time it pinged into life was back at the vehicle. The 18-year-old made the heartbreaking decision to leave his brother and sprint up the hill back to the car to call for help. It was an almost impossible decision, but he couldn't fight the mountain lion alone, and it was clear that the animal wasn't going to give up. Wyatt raced up the hillside. His legs were burning, his chest was sore. Blood poured from the devastating bites on his face and neck. It trickled into his eyes, turning everything around him a deep shade of crimson. The sprint back to the car seemed to last an eternity. Wyatt's mind raced. He was terrified that he had made the wrong decision. Maybe he should have stayed and continued to fight the big cat. Would his brother have left him? Finally, he made it back to the vehicle and reached for his phone. He made a desperate call to 911 and then leapt in his car and raced back down the hill. He screeched to a halt where the attack had happened, but there was nothing there. There was no sign of Taylen. Had he fought the big cat off and made his way across the hill back to the vehicle? Wyatt jumped out and screamed for his brother. There was a pool of blood on the ground, but all was silent. Only the sounds of birds filled the air and the whispering of a gentle breeze in the trees. Wyatt held his breath, listening. Moments later, emergency services arrived and Wyatt waved them down. They rushed to the young man's side. He was clearly in a bad way. He was deeply distressed about his brother. It was time to get him out of there. Wyatt was hurried to Marshall Medical Hospital in Placerville, where he was evaluated before being transported to UC Davis Health in Sacramento for reconstructive surgery on his face and neck. Meanwhile, deputies El Dorado County Sheriff's Office searched for Taylen. They followed the blood trail and the flattened vegetation from where the mountain lion had dragged its victim. It was easy to spot. After just 100 yards from the site of the initial attack, they came across Taylen's body. He was lying lifeless on the ground. Lying next to him was the mountain lion, its muzzle stained bright red, its eyes fixed on the deputies. Not knowing whether the 21-year-old was dead or alive, they didn't want to risk firing a live round anywhere near him. But the mountain lion still was not backing down. It didn't flee when the officers approached. It held its ground, but they desperately needed to get to Taylen. So they fired a shot into the air. At the sound of the loud crack, the mountain lion leapt to its feet and ran away into the trees. The officers rushed to Taylen, leaning over him and shaking him gently. But it was too late. Taylen hadn't made it. The mountain lion had severed his jugular and crushed his windpipe in the attack. It was a devastating incident for Taylen's family, not least of all Wyatt, who owes his life to the brave actions of his older brother. The decision was made for officers from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, accompanied by a trapper, to locate and destroy the big cat. They found it later that afternoon hiding up a tree. They took aim and fired, and the mountain lion plummeted down through the branches. It was dead. DNA analysis confirmed they had killed the correct animal, but officials were puzzled as to why an apparently healthy male mountain lion would persistently attack two young men in broad daylight. It was an incredibly rare attack that stunned the local community, and calls for reintroducing hunting of the big cats again began when news spread of the tragic loss of El Dorado's young men. It was September 2022, and David was guiding Richard, an archery hunter from Louisiana, through the Yukon. The incredible area of wilderness, which is the smallest and westernmost of Canada's 3 territories, offers hunters the chance to tag moose, caribou, wood bison, sheep, goats, grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, wolverines, and coyotes. The pair flew into a small, remote lake. They skimmed the water before motoring to shore and setting up camp. It was a beautiful location, so picturesque but characteristic of the Yukon. Richard was eager to harvest a variety of species, including a grizzly bear. So David had his work cut out for him, but his hunting trip didn't quite pan out as he had hoped. On the first morning of their hunt, they hiked up a steep ridge that was towering above the camp. David knew the area, and he knew that the ridge would be an excellent glassing spot to locate potential animals for Richard. He wasn't wrong. After the uphill slog, they caught their breaths and scouted the surrounding scenery. On the opposite side of the mountain, there were 6 doll rams, one of which had large, heavy horns. David knew that Richard would have his eye on that one. Then, far below them in the valley, there was a small herd of caribou nibbling the herbs and shrubs peacefully. These two finds straight away were bound to earn David some bonus points with his paying client. But things were about to take a turn for the worse. As the two crouched down watching the rams on the mountainside, Richard began to get restless. David didn't want to take his eyes off the prime ram. He was the perfect target for Richard, but he wanted to wait until they stopped grazing and bedded down. They were slowly and gradually making their way towards a broken ridge. It wouldn't be long before they lay down on the ground and Richard and David would be able to stalk closer, giving Richard the opportunity to make a relatively easy shot. But after an hour of watching the small flock, Richard asked if he could scout further along the ridge they were on. David agreed but insisted that he stayed within shouting distance. That was a hunting guide's #1 rule. It is also the rule of the Yukon Territory, and for good reason. As Richard wandered off, David kept his scope focused on the ram. The first few were begging to settle on the ground, and it wouldn't be long before the entire flock would be lying down. Soon he would fetch Richard, and they would try to get as close as possible. But just as he was thinking about going to get the hunter, he heard him call his name. There was something off in the sound of Richard's voice. It immediately sent a shiver down David's spine. Something was wrong. He stood up and turned around. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and followed the ridge along in the direction Richard had left. There was something urgent in the hunter's voice. It had an element of fear in it. When he finally came across Richard, he realized why he had lost sight of him. The path dipped slightly, and David was standing in that dip, with an enormous grizzly bear on its hind legs towering above him. David froze. In the milliseconds that followed, David weighed up his options. The bear was just 3 feet from Richard. David couldn't understand how a bear that large had managed to get so close to Richard. He couldn't tell from where he was whether it was a boar or a sow. If it was a sow, were there cubs or even yearlings in tow? If there were, then where were they, as they can also be a big problem? The next question flying through his head at that moment was what to do about it. David was a good shot, but Richard was in the worst possible position. He was standing directly in front of the bear, between the beast and David. It meant that David had, at best, 6 inches to the hunter's right to make a shot. If David moved when he squeezed the trigger, then it would be game over. If he only maimed the bear, then it would also be game over. All too often, David had heard stories of injured bears who had been struck by 1, 2, 3 bullets before becoming enraged and taking it out on the nearest thing. In this case, that thing would have been Richard. Although all these thoughts raced through David's head and he contemplated each one, they had only cost him a second or two to think about. And now he had to make one of the biggest decisions of his life, whether to try to make the shot or not. The bear was acting predatorily. Any moment now it was going to bring itself down on Richard, and he would feel the full force of one of nature's most formidable predators. He had nothing to defend himself with. He clutched only a pair of binoculars in his hands. He couldn't run, and he couldn't fight. David had to do it for him. And this whole time, Richard didn't move a muscle. He stayed perfectly still, which David couldn't quite believe as he raised the rifle scope to his eye. He stared down it and centered the red dot of his Aimpoint Micro H1 right in the middle of the bear's chest. Then he squeezed the trigger. As soon as the bang rang out all around them, the bear dropped to the ground. It was instant. Even as the shot cracked through the air, Richard still didn't move. David chambered another round just in case and ran over to him. Richard was standing just staring at the enormous, motionless bear. "You just saved my life," he said without looking up at David. After catching their breaths, David asked him exactly what had happened. They sat down and Richard explained everything. He had walked along the ridge to glass for animals in the valley below. He peered through his binoculars, but as he did so, something caught his attention in his peripheral vision. It was the bear, just 30 yards away. He hadn't seen it coming because the ridge dropped away steeply, concealing part of the trail. The bear had walked right into him. He yelled out for David, hoping the sound of his voice would scare the bear away. But it didn't. It just kept coming. That's when he knew he was in serious trouble. By the time he called for David a second time, yelling for him to bring a gun, the bear was just 3 feet away. It clacked its jaws, popping its teeth, an aggressive sign that says, "Back off." But Richard resisted the urge to run. His heart was thundering in his chest, adrenaline pumping through him. Every muscle fiber twitched as the fight-or-flight response geared up for action. Everything was telling him to get out of there, to get as far away as possible from that bear. But he knew he wouldn't get far before it caught up to him. and he just hoped that David would come to his rescue in time, but was hugely relieved when the rifle fired and the bear dropped to the ground right before his eyes. David attributed his excellent shot to the aim point he was using. Without that red dot, it wouldn't have been clear where the bullet would strike the animal, and it would have been a whole lot harder to make that shot safely with Richard in the way. It seems in some states that the wild pig populations are getting out of control, but few realize just how brutal and dangerous these animals can be. They aren't your typical farmyard piglet. Some weigh hundreds of pounds, possess razor-sharp tusks, and can run like the wind. Not only can they devour acres of cropland in a single night, but they can be lethal to humans. On January 13, 2022, 70-year-old Monte Sullivan was waiting patiently up a ladder stand on family land in northeast Mississippi's Clay County. He had with him his trusty .270 Weatherby rifle. He was looking for big buck, something he could be proud of. But as the hours ticked by, only a handful of youngsters trotted by the stand and the sun began to set. Monte knew it was time to head home. Monte followed the edge of the field towards his pickup truck. But as he walked across a neighbor's food plot, he spotted some shadows 75 yards away. He knew straight away what they were. They were a family of 4 wild pigs. They were rooting in the rye and clover, snouts down. Monte continued along the path. He walked parallel to the Chukwatanchi Creek between the food plot and the water. He didn't think anything of it, but he was walking into a dangerous situation. Just ahead of him was another family of wild pigs. They were just coming from the water, heading to the field to forage when Monte crossed paths with them. Suddenly, there was a rush towards the 70-year-old. He just looked over his shoulder to see a flash of brown before being thrown through the air. He landed heavily on the ground, his rifle 5 feet away, unable to move for a second. He was dazed, borderline knocked out. He was stunned for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. As he lay there on the cold, wet mud, he could feel his shoulder throbbing. He looked down at his hand. It was bleeding. There was a significant gash made by either a hoof or a tusk. Then he lifted his head and got the shock of his life. There, standing 4 feet from him, was an enormous wild pig. It was staring at him, its eyes unblinking. Monte couldn't believe its size. He guessed it was around 300 pounds, maybe even more. And he froze. He couldn't decide what the best option was in that situation. He was alone, unarmed, and in the middle of nowhere. He couldn't tell what the animal was thinking. There was nothing to give away whether it was curious, aggressive, or defensive. It just stared at him in complete silence. Monte made the biggest gamble of his life. All of a sudden, he threw his arms up above his head, yelled at the top of his voice, and lunged at the pig. The pig turned and bolted. The gamble had paid off. Monte let out a huge sigh and clambered to his feet. He wasn't sure just how much damage the wild pigs had done, but he knew he had been incredibly lucky. He knew that if that pig had charged at him when he was on the ground, then it would have been game over. He is certain of that. And that had been a hard thing for him to wrap his head around. Trying to come to terms with just how close he came to losing his life that night. Monte grabbed his rifle and stumbled along the path, back to his vehicle. He glanced back every few steps, terrified another was on its way. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and the pain began searing through his body. He required surgery on his shoulder and 7 months of therapy to overcome the damage caused by the pig. It's an experience the longtime hunter will never forget, and he will never make the same mistake again. Getting between a pig's water and food. Elsewhere, wild pigs have been threatening the lives of other Americans. James is as tough as they come. He is a highly experienced and successful animal trapper and remover in East Central Florida's Brevard County. But one particular encounter nearly cost him his life. When James got a call from a neighborhood about a troublesome wild pig, he knew just what to do. 26 years of trapping these animals, Dean had learnt a thing or two. But this particular pig was threatening the lives of people living in the area. It had acted aggressively towards two small children and an elderly couple walking their dog. There was no doubt about it. This animal had to be relocated. James arrived on the scene and immediately set up one of his traps. Sure enough, as expected, the wild pig was caught within 24 hours. Now came the difficult part. James had to move the pig from the trapping crate to a transport crate. That would then be winched onto the back of his truck and driven away. This time was different, however. Something went horribly wrong. The pig wasn't that big. It was around 200 pounds. James brought his truck up to the pig and lowered the transport crate down in front of the other one. Now, it was simply a matter of lifting the doors of both crates and ushering the pig from one to the other. This had worked for the past 26 years. But at that precise moment, two young girls burst out of their front door to see what was going on. They squealed and ran towards the trapper. This startled the pig, who began to buck and lurch inside the crates. Its raw power moved the two crates apart, and it began to squeeze its snout through the gap between the two. James could see what was going to happen. This wild pig was going to launch an attack on the two girls. He couldn't let that happen. He had no other alternative. He dived on top of the pig just as it squeezed its way out of the crates. It went mad and squealed and bucked and ripped its head this way and that when it felt James on top of it. James wrestled with it. He couldn't tell what damage it was doing to him. All he could think about was getting it back into the crates. Somehow, with all his strength, he managed to push it back into the crates and slide the door shut. But he was gravely injured. In the commotion, the wild pig had torn through both of James's calf muscles, sliced through one kneecap, exposed bone, chewed chunks of flesh out of his arms, cracked into his head and cut into his feet, through his steel toe-capped boots. James needed urgent medical care. He crawled across the ground to get into his truck to drive to hospital, but when he pulled himself into the driver's seat, he collapsed, and everything went black. But James was not alone. The incident had been witnessed by one local who immediately called the sheriff's department and emergency services. James's family were alerted and rushed to the scene, arriving just before the ambulance. His son, Christian, pulled him from the truck and tied a tourniquet to stem some of the bleeding. Moments later, the paramedics arrived. It was touch and go whether he would make it or not. Luckily, the rapid response of the rescue team meant that James lived to trap another day. He underwent 3 surgeries and fought off multiple infections, but survived the most brutal attack he has ever encountered. Most of the damage was done by the pig's tusks. They just tore through skin and flesh like a knife through butter. The attack has made James more devoted to protecting children and locals against wild animals, and he has tried to educate people about the dangers surrounding America's wild pigs. He believes that it's just a matter of time before someone is killed by a wild pig in one of America's suburbs. "43-year-old Ryan Beierman took half a day off work to spend it with his son. He drove to the school and pulled 12-year-old Owen out of class for the afternoon. The two of them drove from their home in River Falls, Wisconsin, to their cabin near Siren. It was a trip they had been on before, and this time Owen had the bear tag. It was his chance to make the kill. Armed with a .350 Legend hunting rifle, the pair made their way to a stand in some dense woodland. Their neighbors had been baiting it for them in the lead up to their visit. All they had to do was sit and wait. And they didn't wait long. A snap of a twig and a rustle of the bushes, and a black bear emerged from the undergrowth. Owen's heart leapt in his chest. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He steadied his nerves and calmed his breathing, bringing the rifle up to chest height. He peered through the scope, the crosshairs trained on the bear as it sniffed the ground, foraging for scraps, lured by the irresistible smell of fresh bait. When he thought he had the perfect shot, Owen held his beak and squeezed the trigger. The crack from the rifle rang out through the trees, silencing everything within a mile radius. The bear bucked and lurched. It wheeled around, searching for the source of the pain with its snout before thundering off through the woods. Owen had clearly struck the bear, but he had missed its vitals. It wasn't a clean shot. Now the bear was wounded but had disappeared from sight. The gunshot had been heard by a neighbor who came to investigate. They offered to help Ryan and Owen track down the injured beast. The pair needed all the help they could. They waited 20 minutes before climbing down from the stand and beginning the search. This was the safest thing to do. It gave the bear a chance to bleed out before they came across it and risked scaring it away again, or worse, it attacking them in fear, pain, and defense. The neighbor lent the father and son duo their Labrador retriever to help locate the bear. The dog shot off into the dense woodland. They pressed through dense brush, scratching their arms and faces. Then came a sound. It made Owen stop dead in his tracks. The Labrador had let out a loud yelp and came hurtling back through the vegetation, charging past the hunters. It had found something, and it was terrified. At that same moment, Ryan stepped into a bit of a clearing and came face to face with the bear. It was partially lying on the ground. It looked like a cougar ready to pounce. Its eyes were fixed on Ryan. Its breathing labored. It was cornered and injured. The worst possible scenario. Ryan knew the danger he was now in. In an instant, he whipped out his sidearm from its holster and began shooting as the bear charged forwards. But it was only 5 or 6 feet away and it covered the distance in a single second. Ryan didn't even have time to raise his gun enough to look down the sights. He kept squeezing the trigger in a desperate attempt to save himself. He fired 8 shots in total, and every single one of them missed the rampaging bear. Just seconds later, it crashed into Ryan and sent him tumbling to the cold, wet ground. It immediately grabbed his leg in its jaws and shook the father of 2 from side to side. He was powerless to stop the raging beast, but he had to fight back. The 2 were fighting for their lives, and there was no way Ryan was giving up. Ryan reached forwards and smashed the pistol down onto the head of the bear as it mauled his leg. He could feel its vice-like grip, and it wasn't letting go. Again and again he struck the bear, but it was like hitting a brick wall. The bear didn't even flinch. It didn't even seem to feel the blows. Ryan readjusted his aim and brought the gun smacking across the side of the bear's face, between the ear and the mouth. This time the bear momentarily leapt backwards, but it was only for a fleeting moment. A chance for the bear to reassess the situation and readjust its grip on Ryan. It lunged at him once more. This time it sunk its canines into Ryan's arm as he raised it to block a direct hit on his head. He heard a loud crunch as the bear bit down and was convinced the bear had broken his arm. Ryan wrestled with the enormous animal. It let go of his arm and went for his head once more. This time it succeeded, and Ryan distinctly remembers the feeling of the bear's warm, moist breath on his face as it clamped its jaws down around his skull. Pinned underneath the animal, Ryan had nowhere to go. He couldn't escape the terrifying attack, but he continued to hit the bear as much as he could. He kicked with his feet, trying desperately to strike its underbelly. He wriggled and writhed around on the floor, trying to make it as hard as possible for the bear to continue its attack. Everything seemed to slow down. He remembers seeing the white teeth inside the bear's powerful jaws and feeling the hot breath. He could see the long, curved claws as the bear swiped at his torso, knocking the air from his lungs. He could feel its fur on his skin. Every one of his senses was alive, trying to make sense of the situation, trying to help him figure a way out. Although the fight seemed to go on for eternity, it only lasted for around 45 seconds or so. Luckily, however, Ryan wasn't alone. His 12-year-old son had witnessed the whole thing and was standing just feet away. The young Owen wasn't losing his father to a bear attack, and so he calmly raised his rifle and shot from his hip. He didn't hesitate. He didn't run or flee. He just took the shot. This time when he needed it the most, Owen's shot struck the bear's vitals. Ryan felt the impact of the bullet as it struck the bear. The bear collapsed to the ground, panting. It groaned its last few breaths and then was still. Ryan and Owen stood staring at it for a few moments in silence, taking it all in. They couldn't believe what had just happened. But Ryan wasn't out of the woods yet. He hadn't realized how serious his injuries were. The adrenaline masked the pain, and only now that he tried to make some phone calls could he tell just how badly he was bleeding. The bear had ripped a flap of skin from his cheek. The facial recognition on the phone didn't recognize Ryan's face, and so he punched in the number code instead. First, he called his bosses to tell them he wouldn't make a work function that weekend. Then he called his wife, Owen's mother, and then the neighbors to help get them out of there. While some stayed behind to field dress the bear, another drove them to the emergency room in Grantsburg. An ambulance intercepted them on the way, and Ryan was transferred into it. He was rushed in for treatment, receiving 23 stitches to reattach his cheek and multiple repairs to his leg, head, neck, and arm. He was lucky to have survived the ordeal, and lucky the bear hadn't severed an artery. He couldn't thank his son enough for stepping up and ultimately saving his life. Owen had remained calm throughout the entire attack, and even when getting his dad the help he needed, he was a pillar of strength. Only when his father was in the hospital did Owen let himself go, and the horror of what had just happened caught up with him. It had shaken the pair, and it wasn't something that either of them would forget for a very long time. When the two of them made it home to River Falls, Ryan told his wife that he was never going bear hunting again. It was a hell of a night, but maybe one day, when enough time has passed, Ryan and his son will take on another bear hunt.
The sun was dipping lower, casting gold across the treetops. The forest was quiet, save for the soft calls of ravens circling above. He knelt beside the carcass, his gut and knife in hand, beginning the long, messy work of breaking down the moose. His rifle was a few steps behind him, leaned against a spruce tree. It was always within reach, just in case. But on that day, those steps made all the difference. As he worked, focused on the hide, he felt it before he heard it. A pressure, a tremor, like the forest had taken a breath. Then came the sound, low, muffled, and fast. Heavy footfalls pounding against the forest floor. Rudy lifted his head, his eyes locked on movement between the trees. A blur of brown, power, rage. The grizzly wasn't stalking. It wasn't hesitant or curious. It was charging. There wasn't time to run, not even time to think. The bear was already on him. Rudy barely had time to register what was happening before the full weight of the grizzly slammed into him, knocking him sideways off the moose and into the underbrush. He hit the ground hard. Pain lit up his back as claws raked across him, tearing flesh, slicing deep. The bear was massive, easily over 600 pounds, and it was wild with fury, swiping and biting in a blur of movement. Rudy's instincts took over. His hand still held the knife. He didn't aim, he just reacted. He drove the blade upward as the bear lunged again, once, twice, maybe more. He didn't know where he was hitting. The blade skidded off ribs, fur, bone. The bear snapped at him, jaws gnashing inches from his throat. Rudy could feel its breath, hot and rancid, washing over his face. His arms shook with the effort of keeping it back. And then he hit something, software vulnerable. He drove the knife in hard, right under the jaw, into the neck. The grizzly reeled back, stunned, blood pouring from its mouth. It growled, a low, guttural, terrifying sound, and then did something Rudy didn't expect. It turned. It backed away, staggered once, then vanished into the trees. Gone. Rudy was left lying in the brush, his body torn, his shirt soaked with blood, some of it his own, some the bear's. The adrenaline kept him conscious. The pain was already setting in, hot and sharp across his back and sides. He tried to sit up. Everything hurt. His rifle was still leaning against the tree. Too far. Too late. He knew he couldn't stay there. If the bear came back, he wouldn't survive a second round. Rudy forced himself to move. Every step felt like fire. He stumbled to his gear, then toward his ATV, each movement a battle against the growing weight of shock and blood loss. He made it. Somehow. He got back to his camp and eventually to help. In the hospital, doctors worked to stitch him back together. Dozens of stitches, internal bruising, torn muscle. He'd lost a lot of blood. They told him he was lucky. They told him most don't walk away from a grizzly at that range, especially not with only a knife. Rudy didn't see it as luck. He didn't feel like a hero. When people asked how he survived, he didn't talk about technique. He just said, "I didn't win. I just convinced it the fight wasn't worth it." And that might be the truest thing any hunter's ever said about facing a grizzly. You don't beat a bear. You endure it, you survive it, if you're lucky. They say you can feel it when something's watching you. Carmelo Silvestro didn't believe that until the morning everything changed. It was early September 2024, the first week of elk bow hunting season in Alberta, Canada. The air was crisp, the sky washed with that faint blue you only see at sunrise in the backcountry. Carmelo, a bow hunter from Calgary, was deep in the forest near Madden, miles from any road, house, or human voice. He was hunting with a few buddies, but had gone off on his own that morning. Sometimes you cover more ground alone. Sometimes it pays off, but this time it nearly killed him. The forest was silent, almost unnaturally so. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his boots moving slowly over the undergrowth. He wasn't nervous. Carmelo had hunted in bear country before. He had his gear, bear spray, his bow, years of experience. But something still gnawed at him as he moved along the tree line. Then he heard it, a soft crunch, like a heavy foot pressing into pine needles. Then another. Then stillness. He stopped. Carmelo slowly turned his head, scanning the thick brush behind him. Nothing. His heart began to tap harder in his chest. That instinct, every hunter knows it, the one that tells you when you're not alone. He turned around fully. 10 yards away, almost perfectly camouflaged in the brush, stood a grizzly bear. Not just any grizzly. This was a full-grown sow, massive. Shoulders like boulders, fur dark and thick with summer strength. And just behind her, 2 cubs poking their heads out curiously from the foliage. Carmelo froze. No sudden moves, no sound. He knew the rules, but it didn't matter. The mother bear saw him. And in that moment, everything changed. She lowered her head, ears flat, and then she charged. The ground trembled. A blur of fur and fury barreled straight toward him. Carmelo barely had time to pull the bear spray from his belt. He aimed, sprayed. A cloud of orange mist filled the air, but she didn't stop. She plowed right through it like it was nothing. In less than 2 seconds, she was on him. The impact knocked Carmelo off his feet. He hit the ground hard. His bow went flying. The world became a blur of noise and pain. The bear's weight was crushing. Her claws raked across his shoulder. One slash, deep and fast, shattered his scapula. He felt something crack in his ribs as she pinned him down. He tried to protect his face. His arms moved on their own, covering his head. Instinct, survival. Her breath was hot, rancid. Her teeth snapped just inches from his cheek. The rage in her eyes wasn't mindless. It was precise, controlled. She was teaching a lesson. Stay away from my cubs. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. She pulled back. Carmelo didn't move. Couldn't. He lay still, hardly breathing, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The bear stood over him for what felt like forever. Then she looked him dead in the eyes, turned around, and walked away. Her cubs followed, vanishing into the trees. The forest swallowed them whole. Carmelo was alone again. He was alive, but just barely. Blood soaked through his camo. His left shoulder was destroyed, bones cracked, bruises forming across his chest. He was in shock, disoriented. But he knew one thing: he had to get out. Somehow, crawling, limping, staggering, he made it back to his friends. They called for help. Paramedics arrived by airlift. Carmelo survived, but the scars on his body told only half the story. The real scar was the memory. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, charging, roaring. But the story doesn't end there. Weeks later, wildlife officials tested DNA from Carmelo's clothing and matched it to another incident, one from 3 years earlier. In 2021, a University of Calgary professor named David Lertzman had been mauled and killed by a grizzly while jogging on a trail not far from this same area. Same bear, same mother, same rage. Since that fatal attack, the bear had vanished. She evaded detection for years until Carmelo. She was what officials call a defensive attacker, not hunting humans, not predatory, but when she felt her cubs were in danger, she became unstoppable. And Carmelo was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Later, in interviews, Carmelo said something that stuck with people. He said, "I believe my mom was watching over me." His mother had passed away just a year before, and somehow, he believed she kept that bear from finishing the job. Some people call that superstition. Others call it survival instinct. Carmelo just calls it a miracle. Today, he's back home in Calgary, healing. His shoulder, still a mess. His ribs, still tender. But his spirit, stronger than ever. He still sees the bear in his dreams. Still hears her paws hitting the ground. Still feels that second when death was only inches away. But he also sees something else. The forest, the silence, and the reminder that out there, in the wilderness, we're never truly in control. Not the hunter, not the prey, just part of the cycle. I turned around, and the grizzly charged, a sentence Carmelo Silvestro will never forget. And now, neither will you. They say the most dangerous moment in a hunt isn't the stalk, it's not the shot, it's what happens after. When your adrenaline fades, when your focus shifts, when you let your guard down.
Its snout sniffing the ground next to the baited trail cameras in a grainy black and white video. But at least Shaun knew it was out there. He just had to figure out a way to capture it. Through the wildlife camera footage, Shaun knew that the bear frequently foraged in a public hunting area north of Temagami, in Wildlife Management Unit 40. This area was 50 miles from the nearest town and only several hundred yards from the nearest road. The bear's massive size wasn't its only distinguishing feature. It was an impressive animal, and Shaun nicknamed it Chevy. He knew that one day, if he waited long enough, Chevy would be his. In 2021, Shaun and his friends trucked in more than 4 tons of bear bait before the fall hunting season. They hauled it to 5 different sites throughout the woodland. The group of friends constantly changed their game plans, alternating where to hunt based on the wind direction and the known activity of the bears. It was a strategy they knew would serve them well. On the afternoon of September 16, 2021, Shaun was sitting patiently in his climbing stand. It looked out over one of his baiting sites. This particular site he had been baiting for years, allowing the bears to become accustomed to the free food on offer. As the long afternoon turned into early evening, something approached the site. Shaun was first alerted to its presence when he heard the bushes rustling to his side. He held his breath. He knew immediately from the sound that it was a bear. They make a distinctive noise as they walk through the undergrowth. It's different from deer. Shaun turned his head, and that's when he saw it. It was Chevy. The enormous black bear that he had never seen with his own eyes was walking along just yards from where he was sitting. And it was in broad daylight. Shaun couldn't believe his luck, and he couldn't believe his eyes. Immediately, the excitement and the adrenaline started rushing through his body. He began shaking uncontrollably. He had waited so long for this moment, and now it had finally arrived. He was in the perfect position. The bear was making its way to the bait site, and Shaun had his bow at the ready. But as he reached for the bow, disaster struck. Shaun was shaking so much that he dropped it, and it crashed 20 feet through the air and down onto ground below. Chevy looked up. The bear had clearly heard the bough fall, but remarkably, he wasn't spooked by it. Instead, he was too focused on foraging to bother investigating the noise any further. Shaun cursed himself. That was the one shot he had to take down the bear he had been pursuing for 2 whole hunting seasons. But he still had another chance. Shaun had another weapon with him. Ever since he had been charged by a 600-pound bear, he always carried a rifle with him for protection. On that particular incident several years ago, he had shot the bear with his bow, and the bear had launched itself up the ladder stand Shaun was hiding in. The stand came crashing to the ground, but Shaun managed to fire a second arrow to bring the animal down. Although he hadn't been injured in the ordeal, the incident had spooked him. Now, even though he was without his bow, his preferred hunting weapon of choice, Shaun still had his trusty .300 Winchester Magnum. Delivering high velocity and energy, this popular rifle cartridge is suitable for a wide range of game. It can effectively take down large animals like elk, moose, and bear, as well as medium-sized game like deer. The .300 Winchester Magnum is also known for its flat trajectory, which makes it a favorite for long-range shooting. Not that Shaun needed that feature at that moment. The bear was only 60 yards away. Shaun lined up the shot, steadied his breathing, and squeezed the trigger. Shaun had finally made the kill he had been planning for so long. He called his friends. It took them 3 hours to load the bear up, and after field dressing it, the bear weighed 803.9 pounds. Shaun requested that a taxidermist near Toronto made a full body mount of the animal so that Shaun could always have Chevy to look at inside his home. Tressa McCune grew up with a rifle in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. Hunting wasn't a hobby, it was a way of life. But in 2021, everything came together. That year didn't just bring success, it brought the hunt of a lifetime. It all started with a fishing trip on a river that flows into Lake Erie. She spent the morning casting lines, staying patient, and it paid off. She landed a 10-pound lake-run steelhead trout using her fly rod. After snapping a photo with the catch, she let it go back into the water. A great start to the season. But the best was still to come. Later that year, while hunting private land in Pennsylvania, Tressa came across a big whitetail buck. This thing was a beauty, a 9-point, 147-inch buck. She had her bow ready and watched him for half an hour, hoping he'd move in closer. But he stayed just out of range, and she didn't want to risk him walking off. So, she made the smart call. She grabbed her .30-6 Springfield rifle, a solid choice for longer shots. She lined up, took her time, and squeezed the trigger. The buck dropped on the spot. Clean shot. Game over. And the season was just getting started. It was October 2021, and the weather wasn't doing any favors. Cold winds whipped through the trees, and rain started to fall as Tressa McCune, her husband, and their 6-year-old son Murray hiked through Pennsylvania's Elk State Forest. Most kids would have wanted to turn back, but not Murray. He stayed right in step with his parents. He was built for this. Hunting was in his blood. The McCunes had deep roots in this forest. Their family hunting camp had been around for 80 years, passed down through generations. Tressa and her husband had been using it for a decade, sharing hunts with family. There'd been deer, there'd been bear, but Tressa had never tagged a bear herself. This trip, she was hoping to change that. They made their way up a steep ridge the family called Heart Attack Hill. It was a brutal climb, but worth it. From the top, you could see everything. It was prime ground for spotting game, and sure enough, just as they caught their breath, something moved. Tressa and her husband both spotted it at the same time, a black bear walking straight toward them through the pines. Tressa froze. She couldn't believe her luck. The wind was perfect. It carried their scent away. The steady rustling of trees muffled the sound of their boots on the trail. The bear had no idea they were there. It kept coming, slowly and calmly, moving through the thick brush without a care in the world. Tressa's heart was pounding. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Tressa didn't waste a second. She reached for her .50 caliber muzzle loader, a Traditions inline rifle. She knew it was the right tool for the job. The bear kept moving through the pines, unaware. When it stepped into range, just 50 yards out, Tressa took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder through the forest, echoing off the trees and bouncing across the mountains. The bullet hit right behind the bear's shoulder, a perfect shot. The bear tore off through the woods, crashing through brush, but it didn't make it far. There was no blood trail, but Tressa knew her shot had been solid. Not long after, they found the bear, already down. One shot had done the job. With the bear down, they did what every proud hunting family does. Took photos to remember the moment. One showed a grinning Murray, proudly sitting behind the bear, already dreaming of his own future hunts. With help from Tressa's dad, they hauled the bear back to camp. Her father, a skilled taxidermist, later skinned and tanned the hide, turning it into a beautiful throw. A trophy Tressa keeps to this day. A constant reminder of her first bear and a legendary 2021 season that gave her everything. A trophy trout, a monster buck, and now, a bear taken with one perfect shot. "34-year-old Scott Price has hunting in his blood. It has run through his family from generation to generation. And when hunting season comes around, he takes leave from his job, he leaves his wife and 2 young children, and ventures out into the wilderness. They all understand that Scott's passion for hunting borders on an obsession, and nothing will stop him from making that trip every year. November 2024's hunting trip, however, was like no other. Scott was in for the hunt of his life. His uncle David Price had set the bar very high and left some big shoes to fill. In 2010, David had bagged the biggest bear ever caught in Pennsylvania. It weighed an incredible 875 pounds. But as judging was done on the bear's skull circumference, he came in 6th place that year. Harvesting such an enormous bear was every bear hunter's dream. Scott knew he needed the right rifle for the job. He used his father's gun that he himself had bought when he was around Scott's age now. It was as faithful as they come, a Marlin 336 and 35 Remington lever action rifle. This gun is often a popular choice owing to its ability to take down large game. The lever action mechanism means that follow-up shots are rapid, and it is commonly available with barrel lengths around 20 inches, providing a balance between accuracy and maneuverability. Scott headed off for the 4-day hunt. The hunting ground was in the Pocono Mountains in Monroe County, northeastern Pennsylvania. He was with his usually gang. This consisted of around 20 guys made up of family and friends. They had been hunting together for years and had their tactics well rehearsed. Working together always ensured they had a successful hunt, and November 2024 was no different. After splitting into 2 groups, half were designated to driving the game from the undergrowth while the rest stood in their stationary positions, waiting and listening. Despite having all the expertise amongst them, the hunt got off to a very slow and frustrating start. During the first 2 days, they hardly saw any bears, let alone had a shot at any. There was a fine drizzle in the air, but that wasn't going to stop Scott and his team. One bear was chased towards the hunters, but somebody outside their party secured it and the team moved on. Finally, on the third day, the weather cleared up. The drizzle stopped and there was a positivity within the group. Would today be the day Scott made his kill? But as they carried out the drives, no bears were flushed from the undergrowth. But that was the nature of hunting in the great outdoors. It was part of the experience and part of the thrill of the hunt. Not knowing when you were going to spot the animal or get that shot in was an adrenaline rush. Any moment a bear could emerge from the tree line. On the second-to-last drive, a bear was spotted by the stationary hunters. Scott raised his rifle. He could see the black outline ambling through the trees. It looked like a medium-sized bear. Not as big as his uncle's kill several years earlier, but still a nice animal. The hunters watched the bear, their rifles trained in its direction, but no one could get a clean shot. Scott and his friends slung their rifles onto their shoulders and followed the bear through the dense foliage. They held back just a little, not wanting to startle it. But when they came to a clearing, the bear had vanished. They lost the trail and stood still for a few moments, trying to figure out which way it went. That's when they saw something else. It was an enormous black bear, twice the size of the one they had been tracking, and it was heading their way. The drivers had forced it towards the line of hunters, and now Scott was in with a chance. The bear ambled past Scott's uncle, David, only 5 yards from where he stood. But David had already made a kill that season and he was unarmed. Pennsylvania permits just 1 bear per year and therefore prohibits the carrying of sporting arms the rest of bear season. David held his breath, marveling at the beast so close to where he stood. The bear continued on its path, picking up its pace as it had heard the drivers behind it. It ran past Scott's cousin, Michael Price, but he too had no gun. Then it ran past Scott's dad, who was also unarmed. For a moment, it looked like one of the luckiest bears alive, having trotted past 3 unarmed hunters in a matter of seconds. But, unfortunately for the bear, it was being ushered closer and closer towards the hunters, who were clutching their rifles, staring down the scopes in eager anticipation. When the team saw the bear heading their way, they held their breaths. It was possibly the largest bear they had seen, and it was theirs for the taking. They steadied their arms, focusing all their calmness down the line of sight. But a moment later, they heard a loud crack, and the bear bucked. Scott's cousin, Ryan Price, had pulled the trigger first. Scott couldn't see the animal like some of the other hunters, but he knew Ryan was likely to have secured the beast. But he had only clipped it. It wasn't a clean shot, and the bullet tore through a layer of fat on its underbelly. Now, the injured bear, fearful and pumping with adrenaline, was still galloping through the undergrowth. It veered off the path it was on and headed towards Scott. A few seconds later, and Scott heard a distinctive sound. It was one he was familiar with by now. It was the sound of something large charging towards him, and he knew that it was the bear. Scott's heart was in his mouth. It was thundering in his chest as he waited for the perfect shot. He watched as the bear veered past him, and then, when he could clearly see the bear amongst the mountain laurels, he squeezed the trigger. He had aimed directly behind the shoulder when it was just 15 feet away. The bear stumbled. Scott saw the impact of the bullet. The black fur rippled at the crack of the rifle. Then, he fired another shot just to make sure the animal was gone quickly. The bear collapsed after 10 yards, unmoving. Still, Scott approached cautiously. The bear was dead. It was a clean shot, and when he got up close to the bear, he was impressed by just how big it was. It was only his 4th bear kill, and the animal was bigger than the first 3 combined. Light was fading fast as evening was setting in. It was the perfect end to a tiring and exhilarating day. They had the task of hauling the animal back to their vehicle. Their pickup truck was parked around 650 yards away, and it would take the entire team to carry the bear back there. When they secured the bear in their barn, the game warden came to inspect it and take measurements. The bear weighed an impressive 774 pounds intact. It still wasn't as big as Scott's uncle's, but it was the largest of the hunting season. The warden took a tooth to determine its age. Although the results of the analysis won't be in for months, the team and warden all suspected that it was a relatively young bear despite its size. It is clear that size doesn't necessarily correlate with age. In 2024, there was a plentiful acorn and beechnut harvest, providing ample food for the Monroe County bears. After the hunt, the team all carved some meat to take home, and Scott used a skilled neighbor to help butcher the animal. Scott planned to have a life-size mount done of the bear, a constant reminder of the largest bear he has ever caught, at least so far.